يرأس الجلسة سعادة الدكتور علي بن عبدالخالق القرني مدير عام مكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج. The first session is titled Implementing Quality School Evaluations and Inspections. The session is chaired by Dr. Al-Qarni, Director General Arab Bureau of Education for the Gulf States. فليتفضل دكتور علي بن عبد الخالق القرني مشكورا. Please welcome Dr. Al-Qarni.
Thank you. Hello everyone. It's my honor today to introduce the first discussion theme of this important two-day conference. We thank ETIC for holding this important conference despite all logistic difficulties caused by COVID-19 pandemic. The theme to be discussed in this session focuses on school evaluation and inspection. This is a critical topic as it plays a central role in any endeavor to develop educational system, education policy, and also education practices. Schools usually work under constant daily pressure as they direct all efforts toward managing day-to-day tasks related to the delivery of curriculum requirements. Indeed, schools are preoccupied with a sea of details day in and day out. And while they are naturally striving for quality in carrying out their missions, the need for outside independent judgment cannot be overlooked. It's important for any dynamic education system to create a machinery to ensure that high standards are maintained and that schools receive prompt guidance and advice. Today, our panel will reflect and present their views and experiences pertaining to this issue, to this extra important issue in this era of accountability assurance. School inspection and evaluation is an integral part of any successful educational system. Hello everyone, our speakers, our prestigious speaker. We will start by Dr. Bill Maxwell. Bill Maxwell is working as an independent educational consultant after an extensive career leading educational change and quality improvement at national level. He was Her Majesty Chief Inspector of Education for Scotland from 2010 to 2017 and led the creation and development of education in Scotland. A new quality improvement agency established in 2011 to integrate both inspection and improvement support functions. As Chief Executive of Education Scotland, he led the program of national support for the implementation of Scotland curricula reform program, Curriculum for Excellence. He was previously Her Majesty Chief Inspector of Education for Wales from 2008 until 2010, where he led reform of the National Inspectorate and advised on wider system reform. Most recently, Bill has been undertaking work for the European Commission, including developing proposals for a European framework of quality assurance strategies and providing support for reform of quality assurance in Malta. Bill, the floor is yours, and I understand that you will be talking about building effective quality strategies for the 21st century school system.
Thank you, Dr. Al-Qarni. I hope you can all hear me okay. Yes. I shall move on to, and thank you also for the opportunity to contribute to what I'm sure will be a fascinating session on a really important topic, as you outlined. I shall start sharing my screen and see if that works for us. It looks promising. Play from the start. Can you see my slides, I hope? Yeah. Okay, well, what I'm going to talk about is effective quality strategies for 21st century school systems. And I will certainly focus in on school evaluation and school inspection, but I want to place them overall within the as elements within an overall quality strategy, and discuss how that really determines how we should go about designing school inspection programs. So if I can start by explaining what I mean by 21st century school systems, well, I think we'll have heard already a little from Andreas Schleicher about how fast education is changing. And I think we're certainly clear that the old 20th century notions of education about effectively imparting a body of knowledge to young people who will then probably experience a relatively stable professional life through their careers, that has all gone. Where now education systems now need to be much more ambitious in what they're doing. I've shared here the OECD's Learning Compass 2030, which has been work attempting to map out the kind of attitudes, values, skills, and knowledge that young people need to be helped to achieve if they're to thrive in the 21st century. And that includes cognitive skills, but also socio-emotional aspects, and it includes pupil well-being. It certainly includes core skills, but also higher order skills. So that this is a demanding agenda for schools. And it's very much about preparing young people to thrive in what is quite often called now a VUCA world. That's a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. Quite a handy bit of terminology that's cropping up quite a lot now. So that's what we're trying to prepare young people for. So what do I mean by quality assurance strategy? Well, this is the policies and arrangements. This definition actually comes from the work I was doing with the European Union, and I'll read it directly. It's the policies and practical arrangements through which the state seeks to ensure that evidence is systematically gathered and deployed in order to monitor, evaluate, and generate further improvement in the quality of its school education system. And that part about generating further improvement is particularly important in a volatile, uncertain world. Now, I want to focus in on that as we go forward. And a quality strategy it involves taking forward, using both quantitative evidence, like exam results and data, statistics about the system, but also qualitative evidence, and that's where inspection and evaluation processes, as well as gathering stakeholder views, all play such a vital role. So it's about blending both of those sources of evidence to provide an overall view of how the system's performing. And it's not just about gathering evidence, it's about both the types of evidence you gather, and it's also crucially about the processes which are employed to generate, analyze, and then use them in the system. And it's particularly that aspect of how evidence is deployed and used in the system that I want to say a bit about. So if that's the broad definition of a quality assurance strategy, what are the components of such a strategy? Well, again, drawing on the European work, we worked with representatives from all 27 member states to come up with a view of what consists a quality strategy. And here are the 6 main dimensions that were identified. These are all areas in where every system has some policies and some practical arrangements, policies and practices in each of these areas. So that one is school self-evaluation, what happens around that territory, and I'll say more about that. The second is external evaluation, which includes inspection, of course, and a range of other forms of external evaluation. Thirdly, there's national qualifications and exams, and typically most systems have exams, leaving certificates, whatever you call them, baccalaureates, in the upper end of school system, and make heavy use in their quality systems of the data that generates. But then fourthly, separate from that or distinct from that, although some of the issues are similar, systems all make decisions about how to assess student progress at earlier stages in primary, in early secondary education, what forms of testing or assessment they seek to use, and how they use that data to feed into their quality systems. And then beyond that, we have stakeholder engagement, which is the whole area, stakeholder engagement. And finally, evaluation and appraisal of teachers and school leaders, which effectively the policies and practices around managing the quality of your workforce, of the teachers that deliver in your system. Those latter areas we don't have time to go into so much depth today, but I'll touch briefly on those in the past as we go past. But those broadly were the 6 areas which together make up a quality strategy. And every country has policies and practices in those areas, but it's certainly true that not every country necessarily articulates these clearly as an overall strategy, or has necessarily designed what it does in one strand of this strategy with careful consideration of what's happening in another. But I think the message coming through for us was that coherence of approach, to have a really effective quality strategy for a school system, you need to have a coherent approach, because if what you do in one of these areas has an impact on how the policy and practice will work in some of the other areas, they are all interconnected, and you need to consider how they work together to get a good result. So, and in terms of coherence, what do I mean? I mean, particularly that they need to have coherence in terms of the overall theory of change that is underlying the way that the policies and practices have developed. And of course, there are various theories of change, theories of how you generate improvement and quality in systems generally, public systems, but also commercial systems and operators. I think everyone is clear in this 21st century that the way of getting quality in school systems is not a matter of people at the center coming up with hugely detailed guidance and then seeking to, in a top-down way, just force quality into the system by enforcing regulation, compliance with that guidance. I think there are a few systems that would go with a very top-down view of quality improvement like that. But nonetheless, in the last 10, 20 years, I think there have been 2 competing different theories of change which have been very influential in the way that policies and practices are designed in school systems around the world. The first of these is effectively applying a market competition theory of change to the school system. I'll say a bit more about that in a second. And the second I'll describe as being a collective capacity building approach, which is an alternative model which is really gathering ground in many areas, I think. But what do I mean by a market competition approach? Well, effectively, it's around using public comparison of performance to promote parental choice between providers, just as in any other market, and therefore seeing consumer pressure as being the key driver for generating quality and improvement. So it has these features. It means encouragement of a free market of multiple autonomous education providers, and you'll see that happening with charter schools in America, with academies in England, free schools in Sweden even, kind of reflect that approach, set up as many different providers as wish to be created. It involves reducing the role of middle layers of governance where they existed, like local authorities or municipalities. Deregulation of the teaching workforce, typically giving schools, these independent schools, more freedom to hire and fire whoever they like and train in different ways. It's certainly, and this is characteristic of this approach, it's the development of high stakes national testing and league tables, which are designed for public consumption because they're essential if parents are to choose and apply that pressure. League tables has been a classic way of doing that. And a strong emphasis on encouraging consumers to make choices and exert that pressure. But I would say there's a lot of negative impacts have begun to be associated with a market competition approach. And there are a number of academic critiques you could point at now, which highlight a number of problems that are emerged through a severe or an extreme version of this approach particularly. And that means polarization of quality and outcomes, some schools doing really well and others doing really badly. A lack of coherence locally in how school provision is planned. a sense that vulnerable pupils often lose out because as schools are chasing good league table grades, good results, they can tend to marginalize or even exclude disproportionately young people who are not succeeding so easily. Narrowing of the curriculum, a common criticism, with an excessive focus on what's tested and what's published in the league tables, the test results. And damage to the morale, status and professionalism of teachers that goes with the deregulation and also the focus on a narrow understanding of what success looks like in schools. To quote Hargreaves here, he sums it up as a tendency to make education short-sighted and superficial, preventing deeper transformations in the quality of teaching and learning that can provide higher order thinking skills and develop deeper virtues and values. And it's these areas, of course, which are so important to the 2030 OECD vision or helping young people thrive in a VUCA world. So if I look at the alternative, what is the alternative that's emerging if people are rejecting to some degree this high stakes market competition approach? Well, I've described it as collective capacity building strategy, and it focuses on education as being very much a common public good rather than simply a commodity that individuals seek in the marketplace, something that is an individual benefit or gain for an individual or their family. Key to this model is aligning purposes and aims of education at every level in the system, from national level to school level to right down to parents and pupils, understanding and buying into what the purpose of the education system is. There's a commitment in this model to long-term investment in the professional capital of teachers and school leaders. So rather than deregulating the teacher workforce, it's much more about the state investing in high quality leadership and high quality teacher profession. It's encouraging collaboration and networking. I think this is a strengthening theme internationally. Putting schools, encouraging them to collaborate with each other rather than compete with each other. And it's certainly about investing greater trust in schools and teachers as professionals. At one level, taking a systems theory approach, you can see it as an attempt to create the school system as a learning system. So you have here in the purple circle around the outside of this model, you have the shared vision, values and aims and goals, which have been developed across the system with strong stakeholder buy-in. And you have a broad structure for the curriculum with principles, experiences and expected outcomes, but not a very detailed prescriptive model of curriculum. And within that broad shared understanding of what the system's trying to achieve, at the top there at the 12 o'clock level, we have schools who are very actively and proactively designing their own curriculum, their own approaches to teaching and learning, and seeking constantly to improve those. As they do that, that encourages innovation. And as we go around the clock face, we have impact being evaluated at multiple levels. And that's right down to teacher level, working as reflective practitioners, but schools working on self-evaluation, as I'll come to in a second. National evaluation, equally important, pulling together results of innovative work, as well as seeing best practice across the system. And then crucially, that then needs to be knowledge needs to be drawn out about what is working. So there's a core role for central agencies in the system then to be active in understanding what the evaluation that's going on across the system is saying, what's working, combining that with external research and information that might be coming from international surveys, and then equally crucially, spreading it back to frontline, spreading that knowledge back to schools so that they can feed the knowledge that's been gained in the system back into their next developments. So this is a learning system which is the aim ultimately of this approach, I think. And the EU to some extent has endorsed such an approach. So I jump forward there. Go back here. The EU has endorsed this kind of approach in recent high-level statements that have been made across education ministers in the EU. They talk of a culture of quality enhancement and trust, and that being a culture which emphasizes quality improvement rather than quality control, a culture which promotes innovation, and therefore through that the cycle of continuous improvement. And it's a culture which provides appropriate transparency whilst avoiding the counterproductive pressures of high stakes accountability approaches. And that was translated, certainly in the work we were doing with the European Commission, that was translated into a model that tied together those 6 strands of quality assurance strategies within a wrapper that emphasizes school quality enhancement, that's school-led, schools leading on quality enhancement and continuous improvement to create system-level improvement. And within that model also, we highlighted the need to balance very much some principles that are challenging to balance, and I'll come back to this at the very end, around trust and transparency, for example, and between validity and reliability of evidence. But I'll touch on those at the end. So what does that mean? If I can focus in on some of the strands now, and I'll focus in particularly on the first 2 and say something about data. But school self-evaluation being the first strand of a quality assurance strategy, this is particularly important, but designed as self-evaluation needs to be focused on helping schools improve rather than making schools accountable. So systems in this model, they need to require all schools certainly to self-evaluate. Self-evaluation is expected, and all schools are expected to be involved in generating school improvement plans. But the guidance from the centre needs to be simple and flexible, allowing schools lots of scope to customise that and follow their own priorities to a large degree. To help that, shared quality indicator frameworks is a common piece of work that many systems promoting self-evaluation have undertaken, and has an important role for the centre to develop and sustain those frameworks, and also to provide schools with other tools, resources and skills that they need to help them self-evaluate and implement improvement projects effectively. Schools need to access to resources and training to help them self-evaluate effectively. And indeed, increasingly, schools are encouraged to work with other schools, neighbouring schools or schools with similar interests, to work together on improvement. And then if I move to inspection, external evaluations, in the context of this sort of collective capacity building strategy, what does that look like? Well, it's probably moving away from high frequency fixed cycles of inspection, like inspect every school every 3 years, which tends to create a culture of dependency where schools, rather than taking responsibility for their own self-evaluation, begin to see inspect as something they're doing for others. And they've just finished one inspection and they're thinking forward to the next. So inspection then in these sorts of models can become much more a sampling, risk-based approach, where certainly an external body, it's important that an external body does inspect on a regular basis, but it does so in a more proportionate and risk-based way rather than high frequency following every school every 3 years, for example. It certainly means that reviews, inspections are developmental and improvement focused in nature, and not seen as high stakes accountability exercises. You like to think of it more as coaching rather than examining from the school's point of view. So it feels like a consultancy exercise that the school is going through. And it ensures that external reviews, inspections need to complement the self-evaluation the school is already undertaking. So very much building on that. Then there's the use of thematic, and inspectorates in such a system also have a strong role in doing thematic system-wide reviews, which are not individual school reviews, but inspections of themes, perhaps STEM or mathematics education across the system will be as equally important as inspecting individual schools. And there will finally be a big role for a central body in capturing best practice and spreading it back to the system. So particularly in Education Scotland, the body I was latterly running, we had a large and developing arm, which was very much about running websites to put interesting, innovative practice back to schools in ways that they could use in their own planning for the next steps of their improvement. So it's very much a feedback loop we were trying to complete. I'll briefly talk about data, but and putting together the exam data and any other testing data that might be gathered at earlier stages. And perhaps just starting the second bullet, I think the key here is that data, the use of exam test results and even test result data from primary school assessments, the key in this model is using it for benchmarking and for providing it back to schools to help them support their own self-evaluation. So rather than having the primary purpose of creating public league tables or information for public consumption, that may happen too in a limited way, but the fundamental purpose, and these systems following this approach will invest in benchmarking tools, websites, and other approaches. They'll also invest in training to help schools use data more effectively. And they will discourage league tables in their crudest forms. It probably means that when it comes to primary and earlier stages of education, the testing done is relatively limited to avoid creating that high stakes environment. And then there are, I don't have time to talk about stakeholders or teacher quality management, but simply flag up a couple of points here that stakeholders are partners in the model here rather than consumers applying market pressure. And when it comes to teachers, the state, the system centrally is going to invest in ensuring that teachers engage in continuous professional development throughout their career and that there are strong professional bodies supporting that. And many of them also have invested heavily in leadership capacity in the system, investing in things like leadership colleges or leadership training programs for their school principals. So that takes me to my last slide, which is simply highlighting a couple of the common dilemmas, because none of this is easy, and systems across Europe certainly and worldwide, I think, have been struggling with how to get this balance right. So balancing trust with transparency. So how do you ensure that there is intelligent public accountability for individual schools in the school system? Because it's important there is some transparent data to help parents and the public at large have confidence in the quality of what's happening in their schools, whilst avoiding generating a high stakes accountability culture with all the disadvantages we've seen with that. And then secondly and lastly, balancing validity with reliability is thinking back to the 21st century model of what schools are trying to achieve, how to generate valid and robust evaluations of school performance, which do justice to the full scope of 21st century learner development. And I think I caught some of what Andreas Schleicher was saying on that front, and avoid over-relying on what's easily measured or tested in standardized ways, because where systems become too narrowly focused on just what they can easily test, that has counterproductive effects. So it's how can we measure what we value rather than just end up valuing what we can easily measure. So thank you for listening. And at this point, I shall just hand back to the moderator. Shukran. I shall stop.
Shukran. Thank you very much, Bill. I think it was a very educating presentation. You mentioned that the 21st century has put a demanding agenda on schools, and that's why you call it 21st century inspection system. You talked about quality assurance strategies, generating further improvement and qualitative versus quantitative. And you talked about the 6 dimensions and used in the inspection and evaluation in the EU. And you mentioned that to be effective, you have to be coherent. This is the coherent approach that you talked about. And you mentioned the 2 theories of change. The market competition approach and collective capacity building, which looks at education as a common good, common public good. And you mentioned that the EU endorsed the collective capacity building, and in that theory, you mentioned the self-evaluation that schools should undertake for self-improvement, and you touch on the inspection and the challenges that faced the inspection, namely balancing trust with transparencies and balancing validity with reliability. I think did I summarize your presentation at least to the best of my knowledge? Thank you for this
Yes, indeed.
enlightening presentation. We'll come back to you, Bill, with questions if we have questions and we have time for that. Thank you for managing the time very nicely.